Today on NewsWatch, tackling foreign policy for the Trump White House. How will the president and his top advisors handle North Korea's missile threat? Plus, crippling a generation. How millennials are the victims of an all-out assault on faith. And it's one of the fastest growing churches in America. See how Chinese immigrants are finding a new home and a new faith. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. President Donald Trump is setting his sights on more foreign policy talks after meeting with Egypt's president yesterday. Next, on to Mar-a-Lago and a two-day meeting this week with Chinese President Xi. CBN's Gary Lane reports North Korea's missile threat will top the agenda.
It's multiple missile launches like this one last month that have everyone concerned about North Korea. New threats and the erratic behavior of the country's leader, Kim Jong-un, are being taken seriously. The House of Representatives responded Monday by passing a resolution denouncing North Korea's pursuit of intercontinental ballistic weapons capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and telling the State Department to see if the North is a state sponsor of terrorism. Once again, Kim and his foreign ministry are making threats to take military action against the United States and its East Asian allies, Japan and South Korea. Increasingly angered by U.S. joint military exercises with South Korea, North Korea's vice foreign minister says his country is prepared to defend itself with a preemptive strike. He said, "Our army has got its weapons ready for annihilation, and it is watching the U.S. through the sights of its nuclear strike capability, and it is determined to reduce the American imperialists to ruins if they make a move." Enter China. While President Trump has blasted the country for currency manipulation and unfair trade practices, he's looking to the country for help in reining in North Korea. North Korea is expected to be one of the main topics of discussions when President Trump meets with Chinese President Xi at his Mar-a-Lago home this week.
China has to cooperate. This is now down to, do we want to continue to see these ballistic missile attacks from North Korea, or does China want to do something about it?
President Trump told the Financial Times, quote, "If China is not going to solve North Korea, we will." The president hasn't said exactly how he would stop North Korea, but the Pentagon has already started putting into place an anti-missile system in South Korea, known as THAAD. THAAD is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System. 3 of the 4 missiles launched by North Korea last month landed in Japanese waters. The U.S. government says THAAD would protect our Japanese and South Korean allies from future North Korean missile aggression. Both China and Russia oppose the system because they believe it could also be directed against them. In advance of this week's U.S.-China summit, the Chinese vice foreign minister said when Presidents Trump and Xi meet, they must manage and control the sensitive issues with constructive attitudes. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, says the pressure will be on China.
They need to show us how concerned they are. They need to put pressure on North Korea. The only country that can stop North Korea is China.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
In other news, the fight over President Donald Trump's pick to become the next justice on the Supreme Court has turned radioactive on Capitol Hill. It's a square-off that could have lasting ramifications for both the court and the Senate. White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon explains.
Mr. Flake. Aye. Mr. Crapo. Aye. Mr. Tillis. Aye.
Voting along party lines, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee approved Judge Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court, setting up a vote, or more accurately, a showdown in the full Senate later this week.
Judge Gorsuch has crossed his first hurdle, but to ensure he makes it to the bench of the Supreme Court, looks like Republicans may have to use the nuclear option. That is, change the rules so Gorsuch can be approved by a simple majority of 51 votes instead of 60.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has indicated he will go nuclear if he has to, and now Democrats have enough votes to try to block Gorsuch. Delaware Senator Chris Coons put his party over the top, saying he won't prevent a filibuster.
Unless we are able, as a body, to finally sit down and find a way to avoid the nuclear option and ensure the process to fill the next vacancy on the court is not a narrowly partisan process.
The next vacancy President Trump fills will likely tip the balance of the court to the conservative side. For some Democrats, resistance to Gorsuch is payback for Republicans not holding a hearing last year on President Obama's 11th hour nominee, Judge Merrick Garland.
I think it's obvious that the Senate is not a healthy institution.
But there's mounting pressure to avoid the nuclear option. Some Republicans fear the fallout could be irreparable and urge McConnell to preserve the 60-vote rule. It's a heavy decision for Republicans who desperately want to put Gorsuch on the court.
We're headed to a world where you don't need one person from the other side to pick a judge. And what does that mean? That means the judges are going to be more ideological, not less. It means that every Senate seat is going to be a referendum on the Supreme Court.
Senators are set to square off on Friday to determine if Gorsuch gets a black robe or Trump has to find another nominee. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Russians are remembering those killed in a bombing yesterday at a St. Petersburg metro station, and investigators now say a suicide bomber carried out the attack, but they still are not tying it to radical Islam. 14 people died and 45 were wounded in the attack. Even though the Russians are not calling it a terror attack, ISIS supporters have been praising the attack online. Some Haitians are living in caves and eating potentially poisonous plants to survive 6 months after Hurricane Matthew demolished much of their country. The storm virtually destroyed all the crops on farms that supplied the little food available to the people. Go to CBNNews.com to see more on this story from FaithWire, including a video of parents and their children, despite their circumstances, singing in the caves. In the Philippines, a growing number of churches are speaking out against their president's violent war on drugs. The Catholic Church has issued a rare pastoral letter condemning President Duterte's brutal methods. Some churches say his approach is fueling a culture of death. Lucille Toulousan reports from Manila.
On the 700 Club Asia program in Manila, Pastor Emil Ibanez painfully described the horrific condition of his son's body, who was victimized in an extrajudicial killing.
A wire was tied around his neck. Duct tape covered his face. His hands tied at his back, and there was a very big slash in his neck. It was so big. That was when I broke down. Why did they treat my son like an animal?
Pastor Ibanez admits his son AJ was a drug user, but says he quit drugs and became a police informant just weeks before his death. AJ is among 8,000 people who have died since Philippine President Duterte began his war on drugs 7 months ago. Most of the alleged drug users and pushers were denied due process. A creeping culture of impunity in the society has prompted the Catholic Church to issue a rare pastoral letter condemning the rising death toll. Catholic leaders called the government's drug war approach a reign of terror aimed largely at the poor.
And the Catholic Church, of course, believing in the gift of life of each and every Filipino, directly confronts the incident happening now. How to speak and how to get out of the fear that is being planted because of what's happening in the country.
Linda fears for her life. She says 5 of her drug-dealing friends surrendered to authorities but were still killed. She says poor people like them should also be given a chance to change and have a new life. Poverty is one of the main reasons why these men and women are resorting to selling drugs as their source of income, and this is why the church and human rights groups are calling out to the government to resort to more dignified means of solving the drug problem, which is providing basic needs such as education and livelihood programs. Friends in the police and military are helping Pastor Ibanez solve his son's case. The pastor believes God is using his son's death as a wake-up call to all Filipinos
that we should repent as a nation and come together to put a stop to the extrajudicial killings, because this kind of evil only begets evil. What has happened to my son has inspired me to be more active in a ministry that teaches values formation to policemen, who in turn teach values to students.
Let's give a chance to the pushers and the users, because we believe that everybody can change, and that is the same thing that we believe that the president can do. That's what we have been praying for, that President Duterte really change the way he's running the drug war.
Lucille Talusan, CBN News, Manila.
Coming up, how the big three are covertly poisoning the minds of young people. Hear what's being done to fight back against culture next. Welcome back. Is there a reason for a growing anti-faith bias in our culture? And is it affecting today's millennials? One author who is a millennial himself says the answer is yes. CBN News reporter Heather Sells explains why.
When Disney recently promoted a gay moment in its remake of Beauty and the Beast, it pointed to a troubling trend for many believers, an anti-faith bias that seems to be growing. It can be seen on college campuses like Vanderbilt University, which force Christian student clubs to welcome non-Christians in leadership, or in the media's support for LGBT activists and disdain for those who speak of religious liberty. Faith and culture expert Billy Hallowell says what's most concerning is that this anti-faith bias is now well entrenched in our most important cultural institutions, or the big three, as he calls them.
When you're not presenting both sides of something, when you're not giving people options, whether it's at a university, whether it's in the media, whether it's in Hollywood, you're essentially robbing people of the ability to make a choice.
And millennials are perhaps most affected by this dynamic as they've grown up with a glut of media and entertainment.
People are much more disconnected, I think, from what is happening, desensitized to it. And really the end effect of that, the big change, is that opinions are shifting.
A millennial himself, Hallowell looks closer at these dramatic changes in his new book, Fault Line. One wake-up call? Polls which show a growing number of Americans who don't have an issue with premarital sex and having a baby outside of marriage. Also, support for multiple romantic relationships has doubled. And now almost 2/3 of the country sees homosexuality as okay. At the same time, going to church is no longer a way of life for almost 1/4 of all Americans, with millennials leading the way.
Generational replacement is happening, that there is a larger number of people at this point as millennials who are disassociated with faith than previous generations were at this point.
Hallowell points the finger squarely at the big three.
I don't think we've taken enough time to look at all of those areas together, right? Because that to me was like sort of the eye-opening thing, because it's easy to sort of complain about an individual area and to take a show and pick it apart. But when you really start to look at data and information and logically break it down, it really does become troubling.
That data includes numbers like this. Almost 6 in 10 college professors describe themselves as liberal or far left. Only around 1 in 10 say they're conservative. That's a 50% difference, which translates into what Hallowell calls liberal privilege.
People who are liberal or maybe not affiliated enjoy the ability to sort of speak freely, whereas people who don't associate with those beliefs have a harder time maybe speaking up.
One clear example happened in 2009 when the media blasted Miss USA contestant Carrie Prejean for her answer to a question about gay marriage.
I think that I believe that a marriage should be between a man and a woman, no offense.
If that girl would have won Miss USA California, I would have gone up on stage, snatched that tiara off her head, and run out the door.
Hallowell believes that outcry fits with a normalization of rampant sexual activity. It has infiltrated television, making the so-called family hour obsolete. As a dad, Hallowell felt he had few choices for his kids. His instinct proved correct when a Barna report found that less than 1% of Americans believe Hollywood is faithful to Christian beliefs. Even more concerning is the subtle anti-faith bias that people often miss.
I think the covert is much more problematic and dangerous, and it's the thing that we don't think is a problem, right?
To top it all off, our guide to these events and trends, the mainstream media. Just 8% of journalists say they attend church or synagogue every week. That contributes, says Hallowell, to a worldview bias, a bias in selecting stories and content, and most recently, election night coverage that resembled a funeral.
You're awake, by the way. You're not having a terrible, terrible dream. Also, you're not dead and you haven't gone to hell.
Hallowell hopes his book will serve as an alarm to fellow millennials who have become desensitized to this anti-faith and often anti-conservative bias.
We don't even recognize that some of this stuff is problematic anymore. We look at it as normal.
One way to fight the new normal, he says, is from the inside. Hallowell urges believers to go after careers in Hollywood, the media, and academia, to turn the tide in subtle and perhaps not so subtle ways. Reporting in New York, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Up next, coming up, we'll give you a glimpse into one of the fastest growing churches in America. See how the gospel is changing the lives of this Chinese-speaking community. Thanks for staying with CBN NewsWatch. One of the fastest growing churches in America is the Mandarin-speaking Chinese church. From large urban areas to small rural communities, young Chinese immigrants are coming to Christ, and their lives are being transformed for the better. Mengfei Li has the story.
This reenactment shows the frustration and anger that is common in many families. Chinese-American parents often find communicating with their children challenging. Yang Jie moved to the United States when she was 13. That's when the relationship with her parents became more troublesome.
The family rules are very strict. It's like everything I do successfully, I'm supposed to be that way. If I'm getting a 98, I will probably get punished.
Yang Jie had to learn to obey the rules in a hard way, and couldn't quite understand why her parents treated her that way.
My father is a military member when he was younger. So the way how he was training me is like the military style.
Despite the conflict, Yang Jie never doubted her parents' love, and they encouraged her to find her passion. Gradually, she took up dancing and spent much time practicing in the studio and performing.
The biggest motivation for me to work really hard to get into the advanced class and to wear the most beautiful costume in the whole dance school. And later on, when I start to go on stage and to perform the numbers, the flowers, the big applauses, you know, and what audience say about us became really attractive to us.
Life was good and she fell in love with Paul. Yang Jie placed the same expectation of perfection on Paul as her parents placed on her. Soon, everything changed and their relationship broke apart.
Both of us weren't talking to each other. We were mad at each other and I was waiting for her to apologize to me first. It was painful.
Their marriage and family life were about to collapse. Their daughter, Crystal, was traumatized by the constant fighting and arguments.
I get really kind of mad and kind of sad at the same time because the mad part is I don't think my dad should treat my mom like that.
In the midst of the trouble and the uncertainty, Yang Jie and Paul began to attend local Chinese church services. The pastor showed them and the other young couples how to build a strong and stable family in God's way.
And there's always new people coming in. There's always people who are looking for a community to belong in and looking for people that they can connect with. And I think as a church, we have an opportunity to reach out to them with the gospel and to introduce them to Christ, many of them who've never been part of a church before or even picked up a Bible before, and just help connect with them and help them to know Jesus.
In 2016, the United States granted almost 41,000 immigrant visas to mainland-born Chinese citizens. And a number of Chinese churches in the United States grew from 1,200 in 2006 to 1,600 by 2011. Some churches are coming together to more effectively reach young Chinese.
We're working with people in our church and other churches. There's 4 Chinese churches in Hampton Roads area who are all working to reach this community, some in different ways. And we also partner with other local American churches as well. And we're part of a local church network that supports us and connects us with other church leaders and ministries. And we all basically partner together to reach the Chinese community and to really bring the gospel to that group.
Gradually, Yang Jie and her husband found their purpose as a couple, and their marriage was healed.
Praying is like the daily spiritual just breathing, the air that we need every day. And reading the Bible, studying the Bible, is like the food we intake every day.
Crystal was happy that Jesus restored her parents' marriage and brought peace to the family and special meaning to her.
Lord and glory and thankfulness.
Today, Jesus changed all of us. We need to follow the Lord faithfully and continue to serve Him. We were lost. Now, we belong to the same Father.
Meng-Fei Li, CBN News.
Great to see that young one praying with such fervor. Well, coming up, March Madness is over and college basketball has a new champion. A few highlights of the big win by a school very familiar with winning championships. Finally today, the North Carolina Tar Heels captured their 6th NCAA title last night, beating the Gonzaga Bulldogs 71-65. North Carolina pushed aside the memory of last year's buzzer-beating loss to Villanova in the title game to capture this year's national championship. The Tar Heels' Joel Berry II shot a team-high 22 points, and he was named the outstanding player of the Final Four, actually playing on 2 bad ankles. Overall, the Tar Heels only shot under 36% from the field and 4 for 27 from three-point range. It was the first title game appearance by Gonzaga, who shot 33%. But congratulations to the Tar Heels of North Carolina. That's it for now on CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com, and tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. And you can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.